I love that music, kind of give a little bit, Institutions for Effective Governance. It's quite an appropriate song, I think, and mindset for our panel on the importance of institutions and democratic governance. So it's really my pleasure to be here with these distinguished panelists. My name is Tony Garastasio. I'm the Senior Director for Latin America and the Caribbean at the International Republican Institute, and my work is solely focused on democratic governance. So I'm very proud to be part of this panel with these distinguished guests. So today we have Governor Maria Eugenia Campos Galvan, the governor of Chihuahua. Also understand she was the first woman mayor of the city of Chihuahua, the municipality. And I have to say, we were fortunate this summer to receive 2 interns in a partnership that we had with the U.S.-Mexico Foundation from Chihuahua. They were amazing. I understand we're going to be hopefully hosting next summer. So thank you for your leadership on that. It was a great experience for us as an institute.
Thank you for hosting that.
Oh, it was awesome, actually. And one of them played tennis, which I do. So, that was a plus.
Did they warn you?
Yeah, I don't want to say it too loud, but yes. We have Shauna Hemingway. She's a Deputy Chief of Mission of the Embassy of Canada in Mexico City, diplomat, trade expert, and a former reporter, I hear. And then we have Guillermo Garcia Sanchez, who's an Associate Professor of Law at Texas A&M School of Law. He's a specialist on dispute resolution, arbitration, integration, and of course, international law. You can read their full bios on the WOVA app, so I won't go into too much detail in light of time. Well, I'm delighted to be here today. And today, I think the key theme of our discussion is going to be effective governance through coordination and collaboration. You'll hear those words, I hope, quite a bit this afternoon. And we're going to try to focus on some of the most pertinent issues that affect institutions across North America and really explore how coordination and collaboration amongst institutions at all levels of government can really drive effective regional governance. We'll have a robust, which I hope will be a robust discussion to help shed light on some critical issues such as enhanced cooperation, alignment of how do you align policies, and the importance of inclusive and accountable governance. It's important to remember that a lot of the challenges that we're facing today really don't respect borders or boundaries. They transcend national, state, provincial lines, really rendering institutions as critical. Today's discussion is not only an opportunity to share insights and experiences, but really to help shape the narrative, right, of the future of North American governance, of the future of the North American way, as we've heard quite a bit throughout these past couple of days here in Mexico City. Before we start, I'd also like to ask the audience to submit your questions through the WOVA app. As they come, right? You don't have to wait till the end of the discussion. You just access the panel. I think it's on your right-hand side. Just click the Q&A button. And as soon as we get to the Q&A section, I will make sure to read them. Hopefully I'm tech enough to be able to do so, but if not, hopefully I'll get some help. But let's dig right in. So one of the central themes in effective governance is really the empowerment of institutions at all levels through, again, collaboration. When local, state, provincial, and national institutions really work together cohesively, they become more capable of addressing complex issues and really serving their constituents more effectively. So I'd like to start our questions with Governor Campos. Of course, with your extensive and diverse experience in various government roles, I think you bring a unique perspective to the challenges faced by state and local institutions. Now, given your background, right, could you kind of help and share some insights into how institutions at the local and state levels can evolve, right, can evolve and actually innovate to address new challenges, especially in the context when you have, executive level politics and relations can be pretty tense. What can we learn from, what can we achieve most effectively with subnational institutional coordination? Governor.
Well, let me thank you, Enrique Verret, for this invitation. I'm so honored to be to be here. And thank you to everybody here for being with us this afternoon. Thanks to you, Tony. Let me tell you something that I think it's really important, and I think that it's used to be important, I don't know, maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago. I used to be an intern from the NDI, sorry.
We're partners. We work together. No, absolutely.
I know, as long as we can promote democracy.
Well, we'll get you to do some work with the IRI as well. Don't worry.
No, you were winning my internships in this Washington Exchange. No, we used to talk a lot about democracy. It used to be like a core concept in our agenda. International organizations, academia, governments. And I think that we have lost that idea of what democracy is and how important is in our countries. So I would say that we cannot talk right now. I mean, the whole forum is talking right now about economic development. It's talking about borders. It's talking about trade. We're talking about nearshoring. But I think that if we not center our discussion in democracy, we will not have anything else. So just let me tell you that the rules of the game, at least in Mexico, but I think that in the whole Latin America, the rules of the game have changed. And that we have to realize or reset the kind of government that we have, the kind of governance that we prepare for. Because right now, there's no a federal level, there's no a state level, there's no a municipal level as we used to have. And we, as a state, I can tell you from my point of view or from my from my own point of view, that we have to fill as a state governments the gaps that a lot of times the federal government leaves. And so that makes the governance more complicated for everyone. We have to fulfill the needs of the people on childcare. We need to fulfill the needs of the people on public safety. We need to fulfill the needs of people on migrants, maybe, and taking care of migrants. And so it's really important to realize this new issue and this new kind on governance for what's going on I think in the country, I don't know in the rest of the world, but it's happening. So I think that democracy, it's being detached. A lot of concepts that now we are trying to discuss. And let me tell you that public policies right now are basically ignored by the government itself. The law has been ignored by the government itself. So I think that one part of the discussion is how can we deal with this gap and how can we deal with this omission and how can we deal to fulfill these gaps that someone is leaving us as our responsibility.
Yeah. Thank you. That's a great point. I'm glad you brought up the kind of the democratic deficit. I think that's crucial for thinking through about coordination and collaboration and how we work through effective governance through institutions. And through that, you need democratic governance. So I think that's a great point, Governor. Thank you. I'm going to switch it up a little bit. You're all thinking, oh, of course, Shauna's going to go next, but I'm going to go to Guillermo. Sorry for that, Guillermo. I don't mean to put you on the spot. But I think for this topic of effective governance, I think given your experience in law, particularly arbitration, I think you'd be right for this question. I'm a little bit curious about your insights. Can you share any specific strategies or approaches that you found successful, right, in navigating complex environments? Any lessons learned that we can derive from your experiences to help empower institutions, not only to survive, but really to thrive in difficult, challenging political landscapes? Are there any specific initiatives or practices that have proven maybe effective in promoting innovation and promoting resilience?
Thank you so much, Tony, and thank you so much, Gobernadora and Shona, for being here. It's a privilege, and again, to the staff and to Julia Musquiz from the CVI for organizing this amazing panel and for everything that the Foundation has done to get us all together today. So yes, actually, one of the interesting things about the U.S.-Mexico relations in particular, and I will be curious to hear whether Canada has kind of the same dynamic, is that Mexico and the United States have actually developed their own sort of what I call international law. And this is like a very nerdy point, but it's important to realize. Most of the time, when we learn about international institutions and international law, we think about treaties, like big international treaties, like the USMCA, right? And we think that that's the way to coordinate policies among governments. But in fact, one of the fascinating things, and is rarely studied, is that Mexico and the United States have actually moved their relationship to different levels. So right now, through doing research in the past years, I've actually identified in the last 25 years, there have been 1,900 MOUs and letters of intent signed by different government authorities. And that goes from government agencies to independent authorities, governors, right? We've just came out of one of the panels on Texas and the importance of the Governor Abbott signing MOUs with the governments of Coahuila, Chihuahua, Tamaulipas, Nuevo León, but also at the municipal level. So border cities have actually also signed MOUs, letters of intent, and then even deeper into the conversation, you have state universities signing MOUs with other state universities, and so this keeps going on and on. And why? Why is this happening? It's because Mexican, and especially the border communities, in particular, they're the most active ones, of course, they've realized that they cannot rely on the high-level politics happening in Washington and in Mexico City. If you leave the relationship to be dealt by whoever is in the government at that point, the relationship would collapse. So savvy politicians and savvy communities have figured out that the best way to deal with border issues is talking to your counterpart across the border, and not try to wait for the Secretaría de Relaciones Exteriores or the State Department to figure it out. So in that sense, the United States and Mexico is just a fascinating region to study, right? Now, many people will say, oh, well, these are not binding, right? These are agreements that are not specifically binding. I always come back and say, it doesn't matter, because they're changing policies. They're bringing people together. They're actually providing platforms for dialogue to coordinate policies. And it can be as complex as trying to come up with joint regulatory regimes for the development of oil and gas fields in the Gulf of Mexico, right? Standardize those, to humane repatriation of Mexican nationals at the border. Simple things as at what time are we going to process deportees so that they are not being dropped on the other side of the border in the middle of the night when there is no one on the other side to help them. Such an important thing. It might be simple, but it changes a life. Right? When you're a deportee being sent back to Mexico, being deported at 3 p.m. versus 3 a.m. makes a huge difference, right? Because you're going to get services, you can use a phone, you can contact a family. Otherwise, then you're just subject to whatever is happening at 3 a.m. in the border, which is not necessarily the best thing at that time. So that's a great example of thing. Again, these things are actually having an effect, right? And even it's funny when you analyze. If you all recall when President Trump threatened to close the border a couple of years ago, the first time, because it tried twice, President Peña Nieto came out to the television, national television in Mexico, and said, I'm going to ask every agency in Mexico, that was all federal agencies, to let me know what are the key collaboration mechanisms so that I can show Trump that we are collaborating, that even though there's a crisis about the migrants, we do collaborate. That document was never made public until I requested it through a FOIA request or a transparencia request in Mexico. And guess what? Half of the things that again, these are the top agencies in Mexico, half of them were MOUs, letters of intent, and high-level dialogues, right? This is telling you, again, our relationship is really being built around this set of instruments that, again, many of them are not disclosed, are not public. You have to trace them down. But those are the bones, right? Those are the muscles that are actually getting the relationship together to resolve the real issues that are happening at the border. So that's
Thank you.
a good example.
That's a great example. And actually, that old saying says, think globally, act locally. It's very true. And that kind of takes me back to my days working in Florida. And we actually had the Florida-Mexico Gulf of State Accords, right? And it was to work on issues on the Gulf of Mexico's state to state, right? And it was very effective. It got things done, and it showed results. So that's a great example. Thank you, Guillermo. So I want to switch a little bit to kind of thinking about how we coordinate efforts, really kind of sort of through a multi-level approach, right? I think it's important that we think about the challenge and opportunities of our times that really transcend national borders, as we've discussed. And particularly in the context of North American integration, we need to think about effective governance really requires that multi-level approach, where institutions at the different levels really trust each other, can work together to tackle some of these complex issues collectively. Because regional governance is not a one-size-fits-all. That's not realistic. It needs harmonization of policies, regulations, initiatives across local, state, and provincial and national institutions to ensure the well-being of really our communities. It's really what it comes down to. So Shauna, given your extensive diplomatic experience, right, I think makes your perspective on governance and international relations generally, right, extremely valuable and relevant to our discussion. Maybe drawing a little bit on your background as a diplomat, could you provide some insights into the mechanisms and strategies that have, proven effective in aligning policies, regulations, initiatives across different levels of government to really promote this regional governance? Maybe some specific examples or best practices that maybe stand out in facilitating some of this coordination?
No, with pleasure. I maybe start in talking about the Canadian context, mentioning that, of course, our provinces have responsibility for healthcare, education, natural resources, and I don't think I have to explain to this audience how those issues are absolutely critical, not just in a domestic environment, national environment, but also internationally. So I would say our provinces and the success that we've had is when we see them very much as partners. They're not stakeholders that we consult on various issues, but they're players at the table. They bring a lot to the table, and they're absolutely essential in moving forward any kind of international agreement. And we've seen them in more recent agreements being at the table. In our embassy here in Mexico City, we have 3 provinces. We have a 4th one coming very soon. So we have Ontario, Quebec, Alberta, British Columbia will be coming soon, and Quebec has a delegation that's present here in Mexico City, very, very active. So it's absolutely essential that we be working together on international issues. And I think getting to your point as well, there are multiple agreements between US states in particular and Canadian provinces. We see the value in working directly with Mexican states as well. But I have to say that my colleague, Louise Blais, who was our Consul General in Atlanta, could speak more to some of those very close relationships between Canada and the US. But I think broadening that out perhaps into the structure that we see in North America. And of course, we had the North America Leaders Summit, a very successful summit here in January in Mexico. I think what we see is that we have 3 systems. We have 3 bilateral relationships, and the mechanisms work to varying degrees across the borders, but we really don't have perfect matches at the federal level, and much less when we start to engage states and municipalities, which are critical for being the closest contact to our citizens. But we have to find ways to perhaps match up our organizations better. So we have a really great dialogue on migration and mobility with Mexico, but the players at the table are so diverse, and we have different departments that speak to a couple of different partners in Mexico, and it doesn't match up perfectly. But what the leaders can do, so the North America Leaders Summit, they can sort of set the agenda for cooperation. And at that level, it doesn't matter who the partners are at the table. They bring the people to the table. And one of the areas we're seeing, of course, is security and fentanyl in particular. And that's absolutely critical. So you talk about the police forces responding, the provinces and the states need to be involved. Certainly no respect for borders in that trade whatsoever. And if we don't cooperate closely, it has real impacts on human beings and the future and our future generations. So it's really critical that we get those conversations right. And I think it's been largely successful. Migration, the same. It's really critical that we be engaging. And so I'd say we have a lot of examples where it's worked well nationally in Canada. Childcare being one that couldn't have been accomplished under the Trudeau government without close partnership with provinces. Right. We also have labor market assessments, impact assessments that we do with the provinces, so that when Mexican workers go to Canada to work, we know they're working in sectors where they're needed, where they'll have jobs, where they'll have success, and where it's win-win. So I think there's a lot of good examples, but we could do better in terms of matching up our various jurisdictions to have more effective response for the public. Yeah.
And just maybe to follow up a little bit more on that, are there any key components for successful collaboration, right, that, for the benefit of effective governance, any like 2 or 3 components that you think these are must-haves for this regional governance to be effective?
Well, thank you so much, Tony. I really think, as Guillermo just said, local governments or state governments or even municipal governments, we're using since, 20 years ago, what is called paradiplomacy, or what is called federative diplomacy, which means that at the local level, you can have this contact with your colleagues in other countries, but still, I think it's not an enforcement agreement. So you will leave it in the willingness of the other part of your colleagues. So I will still be pushing and pushing and pushing the level which is in charge of these matters. I mean, if we're talking about migration, I will be keeping my pushing to the federal government because they are in charge of this matter, and they have to generate this policy on other migrants and other. Sí, una política de migrantes ordenada, and I would keep pushing, but also I will maintain a really close alliance or relationship with the sectors outside. This would mean to be really close to the enterprise sector and tell them what is going on and try to sensibilize them about the Constitution and about the legal freedom, the legal framework, and try to help them also the matters that the government is going through. So I would say communication to your citizens, communication to your people, tell them what is going on. I think that one of the rules of the new game in democracy is closeness. And so to tell people we have new tools like technology and we have to adapt it all the time. And I think it's our responsibility to make people and citizens, let them know that we are here and tell them what is going on. So I would say communication, and I would say a close relationship with the productive sector and also with the NGOs, for example. And also maybe another levels of government. And it's important also to take into account that in this concept of democracy, the listening of people. I think that this will help us to diminish this tremendous gap among the politicians, the governments, and the citizens, this listening. I think that the governments that listen to people, we are less worried to fail. So I think that it's really important to listening and to see what people want to do about some problem or some situation. And I would say that technology, communication, and alliances.
No, those are great components, Governor. Thank you. And I think, again, listening, communications is key, and really bringing in citizens as important, viable stakeholders in any conversation is the key to success. I want to switch a little bit to Guillermo and kind of think about, if you can provide an assessment of whether mutual accountability mechanisms in the USMCA, are they effectively functioning? Are they crucial mechanisms for success for North America's integration, and the alignment of policies amongst the three nations?
I got the hard question about the USMCA. So, let me put it this way. I know there's a lot of noise and a lot of media attention in place to the disputes between Mexico and the United States, especially in the energy sector, now with the corn. We had also the auto dispute was with Canada that was involved against the United States and Mexico. To me, every time Mexico or the United States of Canada go to a consultation panel, or they end up going into a dispute resolution panel, to me, it's not a sign that the treaty is not working. To me, it's a sign exactly the opposite. The system is working.
Right.
Because we have a treaty that sets a set of principles, but we also recognize that there are going to be changes of policy. We also recognize that there are going to be moments in which we are going to disagree as partners. And that is exactly the reason why we have a very complex dispute resolution mechanism that treaty, right? And there are certain issues that are going to be addressed by state to state level, and there might be other issues where you're going to leave the companies an opportunity to bring complaints if they want to, so that you don't contaminate the bilateral relations, right? So to me, I see the dispute resolution panels and what is happening as a healthy relationship, because we're still in the system. Now, do I want to have disputes between the Mexican Canada and the United States regarding our energy sector? Of course not. I'd rather have a good relationship and, you know, a strong and vibrant energy sector. But I also know and also recognize that the fact that we are discussing the issues in a peaceful way, that we're not retaliating each other in ways that are detrimental to trade or detrimental to a relationship, I think it's a healthy thing to happen, right? Let's see how it finishes, right? But at least at this point, I can say that the USMCA is on the right track. It's doing what it's supposed to be doing, and it's decontaminating certain topics from other areas of the relationship.
Thank you, Guillermo. Maybe to elaborate a little bit further on that. So some of the lessons learned from the USMCA accountability mechanisms that we're discussing, can they be applied maybe more broadly to other areas, maybe other areas to enhance, right, regional governance, but other areas beyond FTAs or free trade agreements?
This is for me.
Oh, for Guillermo.
Oh, Guillermo, good.
But of course,
No, please, Guillermo.
I think, yes, I think especially the consultation mechanism, setting up specific standards to consult and discuss issues, I think it's very important, right? You don't have to have the same level of adjudication that you can have like in the USMCA. It's not necessary in all of the topics, right? I think once you raise it to adjudication and you have a final arbitration award, then the issue is how are you going to enforce it and whether there are sovereign immunity issues. I think dialogue is the key. Right? Finding a mediator, a third party that can help you navigate the issues and try not to come to a consensus resolution. That is the way to go. And I think that the USMCA in that sense provides us one mechanism that is working well, which is the state-to-state consultation process. I also like the fact that the USMCA was very innovative in giving an opportunity to individuals to also activate. Beyond this ISDS, which is the Investor State Dispute Resolution Mechanism, the environmental chapter is fantastic. Any of you, if you see that one of the governments is not enforcing their laws because they want to have a trade advantage over their partners, you have a right to bring to a commission, right? And signal that the government of Canada or Mexico or the United States are not enforcing environmental laws. That is fascinating, right? It's democratizing some of the proceedings. The same thing with the labor mechanism, right? If labor rights are not being respected, workers can bring the claims directly, and that can end up in a dispute resolution panel, right? So I think those mechanisms of accountability are very positive because they are democratizing, giving more access to individuals. We're relying less on governments having to activate it. But at the same time, we keep the old system where you get the governments and sitting down and trying to figure out where they can actually come up to a consensus. Shana.
Thank you. Shana, would you like to
No, I just
add a little bit to that before we move?
very little, perhaps.
Please.
Just, no, I think too. In talking about the mechanisms, we have great structures and we have great mechanisms, but they're only as good as we respect the process and we respect the outcomes. And I think that's an important area. And I won't go into any more detail, but we really do need to. The mechanisms are only as good as the credit that we give them and the implementation process that we give them. And I think as we move forward, we've seen a lot of issues be politicized. A lot of trade issues have been politicized globally over the last few years. And this we'll have to go back to these rules as a guiding light to see us through. And I think that will be a major challenge in the times to come. But if I could just add, that would be the principle of respect, which respect for the roles that our provinces play, our states play, the municipalities. And I think that's critical as well to a healthy democracy and 3 healthy democracies in North America.
Definitely, and great way to strengthen the democracies across North America. Now let's focus a little bit kind of forward-thinking, forward-looking, kind of navigating some of the change and embracing innovation, right? Pretty evident that the region is in a state of constant flux. political, economic, social, technological changes. They're really reshaping the way that we govern. It's a pretty dynamic environment, but it's imperative, right, that our institutions remain agile and I think forward-thinking and forward-looking. And in the context of North American integration, particularly within the USMCA framework, it really provides a unique opportunity to foster democratic institutions and drive innovation across the region. Governor Campos, I want to turn to you, and you have a wealth of experience in public management. Read her bio, you'll see what I mean. Could you share some insights into how institutions can enhance public awareness and engagement, right, to ensure continued relevance, and you had touched upon this, right, support from citizens, especially in an ever-changing political and social landscape? And any strategies or initiatives that you maybe have found effective in your role as governor, your role as mayor, in your other roles
Well,
in
let me
public
tell you
management?
something about the state of Chihuahua. Chihuahua is a global player in the world. Chihuahua is the fifth state in the country for exports, and it has been 12 years in a row, 12 years in a row, one of the states with the biggest investment from other countries. So we have been working a lot on specialization in electromobility, in semiconductors, in advanced manufacturing, and in low carbon economy. And it's really impossible for me to think and look for other mechanisms when we have the law and we have the Constitution and we have rules of the game for everyone to play into. So I think I am determined, and I think my team is determined also as well, not to let something else happens with the status, the economic status that Chihuahua has. That's why it's so important for me to tell you about democracy again, and to tell you that we have to also, we have to put this concept again in the core discussion of our institutions, at our jobs, at our context, at our environment. Because again, if we don't have this democracy, we won't have anything else. We won't have rules of the game, and we won't have anyone to defend us. We begin from the political and civil rights that we deserve as human beings, as citizens. And if we don't have these political civil rights, we won't have social or economic rights as well. So it's really important to tell you, but answering your question, I would say, again, this close relationship and alliance with sectors, and also the communication. Let me tell you that we have a migrant crisis on the last weeks in the state of Chihuahua. This migrant crisis, and we have been in touch with the public sector, with the private sector, in order to know what's going on and in order to realize answers and solutions for this conflict. And as the problem scales, we have been even more together in order to realize answers. But still, we need this cooperation, this collaboration from the federal government. And I would tell you that if we have strong institutions and that everyone knows about these sound and clear rules of the game, the situation will be different. And I would say for right now, this migration crisis is not a migration crisis by itself. I would say, or I would call that this migration crisis, it's a democratic crisis. Because the people that is coming into the state, or the people that is coming in Mexico, they aren't having their social rights, their economic rights, or their political or civil rights.
Thank you, Governor. And actually, if I can go back to you, you had mentioned this democratic crisis, and I think it's important to bring the democratic kind of initiative to the discussions that we've been doing. And what do you think institutions can do, or leaders, right, such as yourself, can do to help mitigate some of these crises, right? What do you think should be kind of applied to be able to deal with this?
Don't give up with the checks and balance. Don't give up on knocking the door. Don't give up everybody getting together and asking and pressing about what has to be done in the country or in the state or at the municipal level. Because if we leave to happen, if we leave it to happen, then what? Concentration of power will happen? What? No separation of powers will happen? What will happen then? So I think, again, we have to look at the core concept about democracy and the values that entail this core concept. We cannot, maybe we have normalized this concept already, and governments keep doing, and now see what's going on in the world. What happened in Latin America right now with all the migrants. It's not because they want to fulfill an American dream. It's because the governments in their countries does not translate demands and necessities into public policy. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No, absolutely. Those key core democratic concepts are imperative, and I like the don't give up on the checks and balances. That's a great takeaway. Shauna, I want to go back to you and talk a little bit about the role of tech, right? About the role and how you see the role of technology and digital innovation in shaping the future of governance. You know, what opportunities, challenges do these represent, and how can institutions kind of harness, right? Institutions harness this power to improve their effectiveness.
I think it builds on what the governor was saying in terms of public engagement and how critical that is in today's age. I think we saw it first with the evolution in the media sector, where we saw the timelines for media articles and communications going back and forth. People could comment on online articles. And now we see, if I take the diplomacy example, now we're having direct relationships with citizens in another country. We're no longer limited by the structures of formal engagement between interlocutors at the government level or big enterprises, but we're having daily contact with individuals. And I think if we can reflect what we're hearing in our relationship, then we'll start to grow. We see that a lot with perhaps the discussion around values and culture. I always say that international relations never start between governments; they always start between people. I mean, there's a few examples. There's a few examples where countries have decided to launch relationships, but not among neighbors and friends like we see in North America. And so we need to continue to evolve. We're always playing catch up, I'd say, as governments and as diplomats. We're playing catch up with the people and the ties and the links that they have and the aspirations that they have for the relationship. And so I think technology today is there. And in fact, it's really challenging us in terms of being able to take it on board and implement it. And people are realizing how slow diplomacy sometimes works in a world that's speeding ahead. But I think it's the same challenges that governments are having. It's the same challenges that we have in the international relationship sphere as well.
Great. Thank you. And, we have almost about 15 minutes. So I have a question, just a general question for anybody who wants to take it, as I try to figure out the WOVA app to see if there's any questions. So kind of thinking about the way that institutions, again, this is for anybody who would like to, how can institutions, work together to kind of counter some external threats, attacks against information integrity? For example, these do have a very negative impact on democratic governance, Governor, as we've discussed today, transparency and accountability. For anybody who would like to take it.
Well, I'll have a related comment. I don't know if it's exactly responding to your question, but for those of you that had the opportunity to have dinner last night here at the Palacio de Minería, we're having a kind of a similar conversation. What is the future? Where are we going to see the investment coming? Right? One of the big questions that most of the companies are asking themselves, where is the growth coming? I think we have to change the narrative to where the growth is happening, to where do we need to take the growth. And Central America and south of Mexico have always been, and we've said this for decades, right? If we do not bring development to the south of Mexico and to Central America, the crisis that we are seeing is just going to keep growing exponentially, right? And one of the biggest challenges with the USMCA and the NAFTA, for all that purposes, is that it really focused on a supply chain that started in the Bajío and moved all the way north from the border states and all the way to Texas and all the way to the other markets. But we forgot to bring enough development and give them an opportunity to develop. That is not only tourism, right? And that's what Jennifer Pierce from Transcanada, she was mentioning. It's not about building hotels, right? We cannot turn the South into just another tourist hub. That is not enough to bring development, right? We really have to think it through. What are the advantages using technology, right? Figuring out whether there are specific hubs. Think about the proximity of the South also to the South American markets, right? The proximity of the South to the Panama Canal. I mean, there are many things that we can start to explore, but we keep thinking of strengthening the existing supply chains with all due respect to the North states, in the North, and we keep forgetting about the South, right? And until we start focusing more, instead of thinking where the growth is coming and to switch to where we can bring the growth and the growth is necessary, we're just going to keep replicating the same mistake that we've been replicating for the last 20, 40 years.
Yep. Right. Thank you, Guillermo. Anybody else? And we do have questions from the audience, so please share.
No, go ahead.
No, I might have to have you repeat the question.
No.
Very taken in by.
Oh, yeah, no, well, my question was just, how institutions can work together to kind of counter some of these external threats, such as information integrity, right? Given the impact that it has on transparency, accountability, democracy, right? Which the governor has, really focused on that, which was fantastic.
Just work together. Yeah. Just have this collaboration and follow a same cause, I think, because yes, we have to follow a cause, we have to follow a reason, we have to follow an objective, and just go together and walk along for that objective. Collaboration, cooperation.
Thank you.
And
Shana?
I would just add, having those spaces where we can have difficult conversations. There's, election interference discussions in some of these. We don't necessarily have to agree entirely. We don't need to have all the same partners. We don't need to have all the same trade partners in the same order across North America, but we do need to have substantive, detailed, in-depth discussions of some of these hard issues and some of the threats that will impact individual countries, but those threats aren't contained to one country. These threats will have an impact on all three countries in North America if we don't have those detailed discussions, even when we disagree.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, we have actually several questions. I'm very happy. And I was able to access the app quite easily, so I'm pretty proud here. So let's see. One question here, it's a good question. Again, this is for anybody who would like to take it. They don't say who they would like to reply. So here we go. Since communication is key, we talked a lot about that this afternoon, is key to achieve agreements between government, private sector, which we discussed, NGOs and academia, et cetera. What is missing to implement those initiatives that sometimes ends only in paper?
Governor?
Willingness. I think willingness, and I think I think that everybody knows what is not working well, and I think that the difficult thing on public policy is about implementing, and so it's how we push and how we pressure to make things done. I think.
Absolutely. I think political will is actually very important, right?
And I'd maybe add some of the structures for dialogue that existed pre-pandemic. I think we had pre-pandemic, and then we also had sort of a disintegration of some of those elements when the NAFTA came into question. But having those spaces where those conversations, and I think not just conversations, but where relationships are built. I can recall being here 2010 to 2014, and we had constant discussion between our finance ministries, for instance, across the three countries, and they knew each other very, very well. And that's critical, I think, for implementation, follow through, but also resolving any issues that arise.
So I would say open doors, right? I think one of the challenges that we face is that in many cases, governments do not open the doors to hear from stakeholders, right? It might be companies, it might be NGOs. And if we don't have mechanisms set up, I mean, and there are many examples you can use, like investment in Chihuahua does, an investment ombudsman, right? Or certain commissions that are there to receive grievances and you can channelize them up to different levels of government. When the high economic level dialogues, why don't we invite also NGOs, indigenous communities that are also being affected by the projects? I mean, you gotta bring as many stakeholders as possible on board, right? You might not be able to achieve the best deal, but at least procedurally, you get many voices being taken care of, right? And that is such an important point because those are the deals that are sustainable in the long term.
Absolutely. And Guillermo, actually, one of the questions that was asked actually was touching about kind of organized civil society. And just maybe if you can elaborate a little bit, how do we include this organized civil society in this integration in North America? How do you do that? How can we do that?
So that is one example. I mean, there's strong cooperation among ministers of finance, for example, or among the ministers of economy, right? They sit together constantly in high-level dialogues. But there is rarely mechanisms for civil society to be part of that conversation. I mean, there are some governments that have a better way of doing it. You have the traditional way, which is you go and talk to your congressman or congresswoman or senator that has a stronghold on USTR or Economia. But if there was actually a mechanism where before we go and meet with the Americans, like let's say you're in the case of Mexico, we have an open dialogue with our stakeholders, and we come up with the state interest, right? Even that concept, this is a very nerdy point, right? But diplomats are supposed to be representing the interest of the state. But who's the interest? Who makes that interest? Is it just the government official sitting in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and talking to the president? It's a broader community, right? The state is a broader community, and you have to make sure that they participate in that process of deciding what is the interest of the state.
And one of the great privileges of being a diplomat is you're representing not just the state, but the people, right? And how do you do that? How does any one civil society group represent the views of even all of those in that area? So I wonder if the answer will be in technology as it comes forward and AI and some of these ways in which we can mine all this information and have summaries and then consult that with a diverse target group, but bringing in more views than we're able to do as just human beings, person to person.
Great. Thank you. I have another question here. It's please, Governor. Absolutely.
I was just thinking of how powerful and how strong is this alliance that my colleagues were talking about it. It's where you can make this front and you can be this counterpart and you can be a real check and balance. And you can move, but move in the good sense. You can move the people and you can tell the people to participate and not doing it by the populist way. Not giving them pantries or not giving them support in the short time, just giving them the possibility to participate. And that's a very strong part that we can do, we can create as governments. And really believe me that there are governments as the Chihuahua one that makes this alliance with the sector outside and that we listen and that we are prepared to have this feedback from them because we know that people, again, if we listen, we cannot have mistakes.
Thank you. So we have a lot more questions, but we only have time for one because I just got the 5-minute mark. And I guess you can see these questions, and there's a couple comments there as well in the WUVA app that are very pertinent to discussion. So this is a USMCA question, right? So they say USMCA requires regulatory harmonization between the US, Mexico, and Canada. How far away do you consider these countries are from complying in this sense?
The USMCA requires regulatory. Can you repeat the question?
Yes. So it requires regulatory harmonization, right, between the three countries. And how far away do you consider these countries are from actually complying?
Oof. So from what I know, they haven't actually met as often as they should in terms of doing normalization of regulatory issues. And there is an obligation in the USMCA to do it, right?
Right.
Those go back to the questions of how do you enforce it, right? How far do you want to push it? It all requires political will, right? There are certain, of course, we know there are certain sectors that they don't want to sit down and touch. Energy is definitely one of them. and it's one of the toughest one because we are actually, it's funny, like when you look at energy, we're building cross-border energy infrastructure. We're already developing transboundary resources in the Gulf of Mexico, but we haven't been able to sit down and come up with joint regulatory regimes, right? Because these are such a politicized and toxic topics that it's hard to come up with them. Now, the emergence of AI, right, and the new technologies, I think that opens a new opportunity, right? Because that is going to require regulatory work from the three sides. And technology doesn't respect borders, right? You can be accessing websites, you can be accessing apps from the three sides. You can be, your personal information can be distributed in three sides of the border. So if they don't get together, there is a real risk that we're not going to be able to tame some of the probably negative effects of the expansion of the new technologies. So that is an opening opportunity.
Thank you. Anybody else before we conclude? Okay. Well, as we conclude, I want to thank everyone, all the panelists, right, for their valuable contributions and insightful perspectives on the key themes that we touched upon this afternoon. We've emphasized, again, coordination and collaboration amongst institutions and all levels of government. This is key. We've seen how effective governance can be achieved when institutions work together, share best practices, lessons learned, really align policies and initiatives. Looking ahead, it's clear that a stronger North America hinges on trust and democratic principles. The challenges that we face will continue to evolve, and the need for innovative, adaptable, and resilient institutions remains paramount, right? It is the North American way. Once again, my appreciation to the panelists, to participants and organizers for the insightful discussion. Obviously, a great thanks to CBI, a tremendous partnership, to the U.S.-Mexico Foundation, for the great partnership as well, and to all of you for joining us this afternoon. And I hope you have a great rest of the day. And there's a lot more panels happening. So I encourage you to look at some of the comments on the WOVA app. They're quite pertinent. And thank you for being here, and thank you all.
Thank you.